Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Self Leadership Podcast. We believe that real leadership starts with your ability to lead yourself, and it's not always that easy. That's why in each episode, we interview our guests to identify the 5 self-leadership practices that have had the most impact on themselves and their career. Today is a really interesting episode for both Anna and I. We are joined by someone who is not only a great product leader, a now author, and recent co-founder as well, but to Anna and I is also a former colleague and friend. The one thing I remember about working with our guest today is that he brought a very rare skill in the startup space, which is the ability to have a very high value per word, which it means doesn't have to say a lot, but when he does speak, everybody listens. And I'm sure he will bring that exact same energy today. So without further ado, let's jump in and meet Gaurav. Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, start with some quick hellos and introductions. I'm Josh, co-host of the Self Leadership Podcast and founder of Fractional TA. I am joined, as always, by Anna, the better co-host of the Self Leadership Podcast and co-founder of Expansion Zone Coaching. And as already outlined, I am delighted to welcome Gaurav to the podcast today, a former colleague and friend of both Anna and I. So Gaurav, welcome, first and foremost.
Thank you.
For those who haven't yet had the privilege of meeting you, perhaps you could introduce yourself to them today.
Right. Well, nice to meet you, and thank you for having me here. Actually, I once asked a friend to introduce himself, and what he said was he's an investment banker. And I asked him, you work at an investment bank from 9 to 6, or in his case, from 9 to 9, but who are you after that? And, that made me realize we often think of ourselves as our job titles. Our job titles actually colonize us. I think of identity more in terms of verbs than nouns because those are more actionable and they become like my operating system, if you like. So going straight into it, like, if you strip me of my job titles, my LinkedIn profile, my nationality, I'm left with, at my core, my values. Rest everything else is packaging. And if I go deeper into my values, my top values are always being kind and calm, being open-minded, and giving back more than I take. And I can go into more details of these values as well. But, I was speaking to another friend and we were talking about values, and he said his top value is being authentic, but it takes him a while to become authentic. And it's like the minute you put a condition on a value, it's not a value anymore. So values are how you actually live your life when you're under pressure. Everyone's reasonable, everyone's kind and calm most of the times until their buttons are pressed or until, they're under pressure. And that's where the values really come in. Who are you under pressure? So I think of myself as my values, and they show up in everything that I do every second of my day, every second of my life, every day of my life, and so on and so forth.
You're talking mine and Anna's language here.
That's great. That's great. And, I can go more into those values as well. So being open-minded, like, I'm sure you've heard of the quote from Carl Jung. He said, thinking is very difficult. That's why we judge. That's why most people judge. So it's always about, I think of being open-minded as, can I always look at the other side of the coin without being judgmental? Then, giving back more uh, than I take, that's a value I directly inherit from my father. And he used to say a beautiful thing, actually. He used to say that, leave people and things better than how you found them. So however you met someone, whether that's a single conversation, whether that's, few years of you knowing them, have you made them better? Have you made them better than how you found them? And yeah, those are some of my values, and those manifest in my work as well. And like you said, Josh, I'm building a startup, AI startup, Valence, which helps organizations deliver on their goals and make and help employees succeed by using managers as a force multiplier.
That's
Wow.
brilliant. Thank you so much, Gaurav, for sharing. And I hope you won't mind me playing devil's advocate for a moment. When
Go for it.
when I ask about the values being something that you also do, or especially inhibit during high pressure situations. Say something like open mindedness, right? That may not be something that a lot of people live in their day to day life, right? Even when things are okay, that may not be something that they live by. Whereas for you, it's something that you very mm, intentionally bring. And I love the idea that you say that also stays when it's a really difficult moment. But sometimes, at least I find, the values always stay aspirational, but sometimes it does become difficult to live by them. So for me, I share a similar value to you. It's kind of my version of open-mindedness is unconditional positive regard. And I find that when I'm feeling resourceful, I can bring that super well. But at other times, a bit of judgment will creep in. And that's also okay, as long as I know, hey, that's not really how I wanted to behave, and how can I do differently? So I guess what I'm saying is it really true that one can always live by one's values in high pressure situations, or is it more about what's the intention and what's the aspiration?
That's a great question. And it's a constant work in progress, and that's where the practices come in play.
Mm,
Like I'll give you a very simple example, right? Like gratitude. A simple example that if you frame gratitude, if you do that practice consistently, anything that you think of as, oh my God, this person is coming up to me, you can reframe it
mm,
as, oh wow, they really care about me. And that's just a different side of looking at
mm,
the same situation, but looking at it from the other side. And that's being open minded without being judging, but, giving it a different perspective. It takes a minute to switch from that judgmental to observational mindset. Um, and that's a constant practice that again comes with, things like meditation by being intentional. That, you're able to catch yourself at the moment and you can switch.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And I'm very excited for us to, in a bit, jump into the exact practices that help you do that most of the time, if not all of the time. I'm sure we can all learn a lot from that.
I feel like this episode is where we're going to hear the word practice in its most pure form. But that's my guess. Maybe we'll see. Okay, well, let's move on to the second question, Gaurav, for today. We are learning as we do more of these episodes that the term self leadership means something different to each person that we ask. So, what does self leadership mean to you?
That's a great question. I think self-leadership is the discipline of becoming the best version of yourself, but consistently. And I, emphasize on that word consistently because, for days and for weeks, it's easy to do it, but then the weather changes and winter comes and, that consistency drops. For me, what self-leadership really means is one, reflection. So always reflecting. And I have a very simple framework for it that if you take out time for reflection, it leads to self-awareness. If you're self-aware, that's where the journey of growth starts, and that leads to self-growth. If you're growing, it leads to more confidence. You become more self-confident. And when you're self-confident, it leads to self-love. You become more comfortable in your skin. And that's when you have that self-love, you can spread the love. So one, it's reflection. Second, it's mindset. Always having that beginner's mindset, growth mindset, and approach to things that how can I strive to be better at this? In terms of self-leadership, I personally think that thing like perfection doesn't exist. It's always striving for perfection and becoming a better version. And the third one is process over outcomes. Trust the process and the inputs rather than outcomes. Not attaching ourselves to outcomes. A lot of people I speak to, they talk about happiness, chasing happiness. And I ask a question that what is happiness? And what makes you happy? And then I hear answers like, oh, when I'm with my friends, I'm happy. When I'm on a holiday, I'm happy. When I'm playing the guitar, I'm happy. Then I ask a counter question. When you're not with your friends, are you not happy? You're also telling your brain the opposite that, and when you're not playing the guitar, you're not happy. So when we start making these associations, we also tell our brain what those associations do not mean.
I feel like there's so much richness in what you just said, Gaurav, and there are just a few things that I'd love to unpack. And well, let me say that I love the framework, the one that starts with self-reflection and then self-growth leads to self-confidence and ultimately ends in self-love. It really feels like you've just put a name to the process that I've been on for I don't know the last God knows how many years. So I thank you for that. And what I'm interested in is how does that process that culminates in self love or leads towards self love, how does that stack up with being the best version of yourself? How do they go together?
Amazing. And I think, yeah, that's a very good question. And it again comes back to, the values. As I was saying that, if my top value is being kind and calm, how does this relate to being kind and calm? If I have more self-love and if I'm more comfortable in that self-love, then I can be more kind and calm. It comes more naturally to me. And to answer your one of your previous questions that you asked, then, even under pressure, that's not a question within my head. If I have more, if my vessel is full, I can feed more from that vessel.
I love it. So basically, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is the process that starts with self-awareness and leads towards self-love is a tool to help you become the best version of yourself. And the best version of yourself is you living in accordance to your values at all times.
100%, 100%, 100%, unconditionally.
Mhm. Amazing.
For the record, that should be your next book. I would 100% buy that book. In fact, I'll pre-order it now.
That's a good idea for the book.
I also have no tattoos, and if I was to get one, it would be the framework. I just look at it on my arm all day.
I'll send you an invoice when once you get that.
I'll happily pay. No problem. No problem.
It's copyrighted.
I thought it might be. Well, my question was going to be maybe I should actually ask this, actually, and we'll go back to like a serious question because I want to know the answer. The framework that you've described, as Anna's already articulated, really resonates, I think, quite clearly with both of us. So my question is that framework yours? Did you find this? Is it a work in progress? How did that framework come to be?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, it is my framework. So over the years, I've been, building a lot of these frameworks, values, habits, practices. And this is one of those practices that came up with reflection. So when I kept on reflecting over what this really means, what this journey really means, this is one of the frameworks I came up with myself. So it is my own framework. And like I said, it's copyrighted. So if you get a tattoo, be careful.
You've been warned, listeners. You've been warned. Cool. Okay. Well, let's dig into maybe what that framework looks like practically or day to day. So, as always, we're going to run through the 5 practices that you feel have had the biggest impact on your self leadership journey so far. So, in no particular order, let's start with number 1.
Yeah, so my first practice is meditation and breathwork. Meditation, I wake up every day and meditate between 40 minutes and 2 hours. So I don't put a timer to it. I just sit down. That's the first thing I do after waking up. Uh, yeah, and just focus on my breath. So meditation helps me reflect and, really disconnect and calms my mind and clears my mind. And with breath work, what's also interesting is if you think of all our fears or anxieties or expectations, everything finally leads to fear of death. Everything starts with oh, if I lose my job, what's going to happen? I won't have enough money. If I don't have enough money, I won't have food. If I don't have enough food, I'm going to die. If I've come out of a relationship, oh, I'm going to be single. If I'm going to be single, there's nobody who's going to take care of me. There's nobody going to take care of me. I'm going to die. So everything boils down to fear of death. And if you unpack that fear of death, basically, death is a process where you're breathing and then you suddenly stop breathing. So it's, in a way, you can translate fear of death to fear of not breathing. And if you can train your breath and if you can do breath holds and if you can hold your breath for a long time and if you're not breathing, then you're already getting familiar with that fear and you're embracing that fear. So that practice helps me, conquer more my anxieties, my fears. So it's one of the best practices and top practices that I've had for years now.
Wow, you're taking us deep straight away, Gaurav. Tell us, practically speaking, how did you arrive at meditating between 40 hours and 40 hours, 40 minutes and 2 hours every day? And how did you develop these breathing techniques? What was the starting point, and what was the evolution up until now?
Right. So um, meditation started with a very simple practice. So I used to play badminton very professionally, and I was so competitive that if I lost a game, there was no way I was going to shake hands with my opponent. And if I lost badly, I would break my racket. So my coach came to my house and he said to my father that your son's crazy. And my father was like, you've come all the way to tell us that. We've known that for 13 years. So he was like, the only condition I'm going to coach him on if he learns how to meditate. And that's where my journey really started. First, I resisted. I was 13. But then, as I meditated for first few weeks, I saw that my game changed, my relationships changed, my attitude changed, and then there was no going back. So that's how the meditation practice really started. And then over time, yeah, I've tried many different practices, very different schools of meditation. And it started from very short 5-minute practice, kept on increasing, and over time it's between 40 minutes and 2 hours, sometimes even longer, but that's on a typical day.
Wow, that's quite something. And tell me, Gaurav, when you first started meditating and it was shorter meditations, did you use a tool for that? Or what was the exact practice? And I guess for our listeners, what would be your recommendation in terms of getting started?
So getting started is easy. I would say, just look at the wall in front of you for 30 seconds with your eyes open at one point, and then close your eyes and try to recall what you saw for 30 seconds, every detail. And that brings you so much into the present moment.
Mm,
Once you start doing that, because the problem with meditation is, in a way, it feels very passive, that you're just closing your eyes and you're not engaging your brain into anything. And that can get very uncomfortable for people. Like most people want to engage, they want to do something actively. So that's a good starting point, that where people can start, engaging first and then slowly over time, start focusing on their breath, which is not very natural when you start.
I love it. And tell me, on the breathwork side of things, was that a direct result of more increased focus on your breathing during meditation, or was there something else that inspired and sparked that interest in breathwork as such?
It's a combination of things. So one, definitely it was the focus on breathing. But also, if you go into the details of breathing, I really recommend a book called Breath by James Nestor. It talks about, how your entire well-being is related to the quality of your breath. So if you take between 5 and 6 breaths a minute, how that enhances your well-being and completely shifts you from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic system where, you already feel so calm. So that was the starting point. But like you say, then, there are things that made the practice deeper and deeper over time.
The question I wanted to ask Gaurav is, I feel like when I started my self-leadership journey, meditation was a concept that you come across quite frequently. And in my experience, it was something I could do on a good day, which you kind of touched on in your introduction. And at that point, it was only 10 minutes. So realistically, there wasn't much in the way of an excuse for me not to do it, but it felt like something you do on a good day where you had the time. So my question to you is, for you to dedicate so much time to this practice so consistently and so frequently, what would you say the one big impact you get from the practice itself is? Or you could answer it on the inverse. If you were to miss a day, what would that impact be?
That's a very good question. So I can answer that in a few ways, but number one is like, the focus and the quality of outputs. So if you're, I'm talking like a businessman now, that if you invest 10 minutes in something, can you get a return of 60 minutes? And the answer with meditation is yes. The task that I would be completing in like, let's say 2 hours, I can now complete in 1.5 hours because I have much more focus. And even the quality of the output that I get with, the clarity of mind that I have when I'm working on something, it's much higher. It's a very transactional answer, but I think when people are getting into meditation, those transactional answers help. That if you are investing 10 minutes, you'll definitely get a return on that investment.
Amazing. So, Gaurav, what would be your second self-leadership practice?
The second one is building endurance, and I'm a runner. I'm a long distance runner. I was telling Anna that the other day, yeah, to clear my mind, I ran 50 kilometers. So, um,
Mad.
yeah, so
Wow.
yeah, so running, cycling, swimming, these are practices which are very important to me, if you like. From a neuroscience point of view as well, they, fuel so many endorphins. It brings endorphins, dopamine, you get endocannabinoids. There's a bunch of things that you get from running, cycling, swimming.
Tell me, Gaurav, how does this fit together with the framework that we discussed earlier? How does this aid and contribute towards increased self-awareness and self-growth and so on?
It's very interesting when I'm running a long distance. First, you're testing your body. You're testing your body, like, and at some point, your body starts to give up. Your body starts telling you that that's enough. And then I need to switch into that, I need to be aware to switch into the other part of my body that, now I need my mind to help me here because my body is giving up. And then I switch to that mental energy and I start drawing from that
Mm.
pool. And after a certain point of time, when you're doing even long distances, your mind also starts to give up. Like, are you crazy? You're running this long? Yeah. And then the only thing that you can do is surrender and draw into, that, if you like, spiritual energy. That I've exhausted my physical energy. I've exhausted my mental energy. Now what's left? I just have to trust that will be fine.
I absolutely love that spiritual element of surrender and trust and surrendering control to something bigger as part of running. It's a completely different way of framing it. I am very far away from running 50K. The maximum I've done was a half marathon last year, and even that felt
That's amazing.
intense. But
That's amazing.
I always I felt that this is where I'll stop and draw the line, and maybe it will be. But after listening to you, like, you really piqued my curiosity of pushing further for the sake of that spiritual surrender. It completely reframes sport from something where I need to perform, I need to do more, I need to push myself, to I get to a place where I let go. And yeah, I think that's beautiful. If we link it again to the framework, then is it fair to say that allowing yourself to pass through these different phases when you're running helps you with your journey on kind of self-awareness and self-growth? Because a big part of self-awareness and self-growth especially is tapping into that surrender.
100%. So one, one is the self-awareness part, that at what point do you become aware that you're running out of one pool of energy and you need to switch?
Mm,
And are you growing towards a better version of yourself by switching into a different pool? And then the third one is confidence, self-confidence. The
mhm,
next time you do
mm.
it, it makes you more self-confident that now I know if I have to run a 20K, it's going to be easier next time.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And if we bring it back to the practicalities for a moment, so say our listeners are not currently, or some of them are not currently into endurance sports. How did you start, and what's your recommendation on how they could best start?
The best way to start, there are plenty of plans from, you know, couch to 5K. So I'd say that's one of the best ways to start. That start slow. You don't have to run a 5K or a marathon on a day one, and that's not even realistic. So start with all the couch to 5K plans usually start with run for 1 minute, walk for 1 minute, repeat it for 10 times. And then, you slowly increase the intensity, and within 6 to 8 weeks, you'll be able to run your first 5K. And if you can run a 5K, then the journey from 5K to 10K is much easier. And then 10K to half marathon becomes even easier,
Mhm.
and so on and so forth.
I couldn't agree more. Couch to 5K worked a treat for me. And what I'd also say is run slowly. Run
Exactly.
slowly. No need to go fast.
Yeah, and that's a very different training that you're doing. Once you start running 5K, if you want to improve your times, yeah, there are different exercises that you can do to, improve your times.
The question I wanted to ask is also baked in practicality. 50K runs would, I would assume, are reasonably time consuming, even for you. So my question is, how does the practice of running fit into your week, day? What does that look
Amazing,
like logistically?
amazing. So I run 3 days a week religiously. So my sacred days for running, like I call, are Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. So, yeah, and those are non-negotiable. So Mondays and Thursdays I normally do a 5K, and then Saturday is a longer run. Not always a 50K, that's an exception, but normally between 10 and 20K.
Is this a set time?
Yes, every morning after my meditation, on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, I would go for a run. It's so I think of all these consistent practices as if-then statements. So I try to keep decision making out of it. And I pretty much live by the calendar like a robot. That, oh, I finished my meditation. Great. It's time for me to run. Just wear your running shoes. Don't put your brain to it. And I start running.
Tell me, Gaurav.
The minute I start overthinking, it doesn't happen.
What I am very curious to hear is at what time do you wake up?
So it's usually between 6 and half 6. That's my typical time of waking up. And I don't set an alarm clock. I wake up without an alarm clock.
Oh, wow. That is most impressive. But yes, so what I'm hearing you say is that what you like to do is you like to put these self leadership practices kind of up top, that those are the ways that you always start your day with. That makes them always protected and sacred.
100%. 100%. 100%. I'm sure you've heard of the book, 5 a.m. Club. Fantastic book. For for those who haven't read it or who haven't heard of it. But yeah, it's exactly says that when everyone else is sleeping, there are no distractions. You can actually dedicate time and get into these practices.
My recommendation for this book, as a proud member of the 5 a.m. Club, is they should hand it out on maternity wards. I feel like the 5 a.m. Club is essential the moment that you get a child, because every moment of the waking day is no longer your own. And the desperate seeking of those moments begins immediately. So I feel like that book should be mandatory across maternity wards worldwide.
It's a great suggestion.
We should do it. Cool. Well, let's move on to habit number 3, or practice number 3. So, Gaurav, what is your next self-leadership practice?
See, talking about books, my next leadership practice is reading and writing. As you can see behind me, yeah, I'm really passionate about reading. I try to read at least a book a week. That's what I strive for. It's about reading about various different topics. I feel it gives me a different perspective, opens up my mind, and again ties back to my value of being open-minded. The more I read, the more open-minded I think I become. So yeah, that's my next practice.
One question I wanted to ask on this is, how do you select what to read?
That's a very good question. So earlier, what I used to do was I used to read um, different books at different times. And what I felt was that one, I was retaining less and I was reading a lot of many different topics. But now what I do is I choose a topic and I read 5 to 10 books on that one particular topic and I go deeper into it. And what that helps with is one, that my retention increases because I'm constantly reinforcing what I've read. And also I get different perspectives on the same topic from different authors. So that helps us as well. So to answer your question, I read in themes. And how do I select a theme? I think themes come to you with self-awareness. You exactly know what you need. And I think books come to you at the right time, or themes come to you at the right time. It's like I'm a firm believer of that right people and right books always come to you at the right time.
I couldn't agree more. I absolutely. I remember in the past, buying books and then feeling like, well, I've bought the book, I need to read it, and kind of putting that pressure on myself. But sometimes it just wouldn't flow. And then eventually I would just, put the book aside and be like, well, I guess it's not meant to be right now, but feeling, in the back of my mind, feeling a bit guilty that, but what am I doing just accumulating books? And why did I just go out and buy these 5 new books if I haven't read half of my library yet? But then something would happen and I would feel drawn to that book. I would start reading it, and all of a sudden it would have so many valuable impulses to exactly what I was living in that moment. And it's so magical when you create that space, or when you give that
Mm,
space to allow that to happen. Yeah.
definitely, definitely.
I'd add to that as well by saying, whenever I'm asked about what my favorite book is, it's actually not about the quality of the book. My answers are never because those books are better books than the other books that I've read. It's always because the timing of me reading that book was more
100%.
relevant than the book itself.
Couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
Mm. In terms of the actual selection of the books, in the moment when you decide, hey, I've got a hot topic or a current theme right now, how do you curate that initial selection?
Yes, that's a very, standard process. I don't have a special process for
Hmm.
that. So I go on Goodreads, I go on Amazon, I read a few
Hmm.
reviews. I ask people for
Hmm.
recommendations if I trust someone on that particular topic. So yeah, using those different things. And then once you start reading the first book, actually, within that book as well, if you start looking in the appendix, you get many more book recommendations from that book.
So true. So true. And tell me, Gaurav, about the timing of when you read. Is that after your morning run? So is that part of the kind of sacred routine of the morning?
100%. It's and also I have a evening routine as well when I read. So yeah, so one is in the morning
Mhm.
and one is before going to the bed. So before going to bed, I read like I do a light read, and in the morning it's more of the theme that I'm reading.
Mhm.
A lot of people ask me that reading a book a week is a lot. But then, I, I break it down for a lot of people saying that, if you think about a typical book is about what, 250 to 300 pages. So if you read, let's say, even like, 30 pages a day, which typically takes between 30 and 40 minutes for most people, you can finish a book in 8 to 10 days. So it's very easily achievable to read. And also, one saying that you don't have to read a book in a week or 10 days, so long as you're consistently reading. Even if you read 5 to 10 pages, um, it's enough. But I'm saying it's achievable to read a book in a week to 10 days easily.
That's true. That's actually such a helpful way of putting it, because it can feel quite overwhelming, that thought of
Mm,
what am I meant to like read 50 books this year? But when you break it down like that, it really becomes very manageable. If I think about the time that I spend watching television and TV shows, which I will argue also have a place in my world and well-being, but it actually is a lot less time than we think. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I'm fortunate that the way I was made, I'm quite quite boring that way, so I don't have a television. So yeah, I've never had a television. So yeah, the only way I can, entertain myself is with books.
Gaurav, neither do I, but I have a computer. And that and that makes it work. But jokes aside, what I did want to ask is, do you ever take notes from the books that you read, and how do you kind of make sure that you retain what you want to retain from reading a book?
Yeah. So I don't take notes, but I always have a highlighter when I'm reading. So I highlight all my books. So if I open any of my books right now, you'll see plenty of highlights in the book. So anytime I want to go back to a book, I can easily go back and read the highlights. As I said earlier, I was not retaining. I felt I was not really retaining a lot because I was reading many different topics. But now, when I read on one topic and go deep, then my retention automatically increases. And just an extension of reading was writing. Writing is a form of self-expression for me, and it's also like creativity. I write my thoughts on a topic. And as you said earlier, yeah, I'm writing a book at the moment. It's about how to help managers succeed. That's a topic which is very close to my heart in many different ways. I don't want to promote my book here, so I don't want to go into the details of why that topic is close to my heart. But yes, writing is also a form of self-expression for me.
So, Gaurav, we're on to your penultimate practice. So, what is it?
Yeah, so the fourth one I would say is music. So music is a big part of who I am. Helps me being more creative, helps me being, more self-aware. Actually, this practice comes from my music teacher. My music teacher actually used to say that if you learn for, if you learn from me for 1 hour, practice that for 8 hours, and then reflect on that for 80 hours, and only then come for the next lesson. So that's something which, has stayed with me. That how do you, take a little piece of work, practice it, and then reflect over how you can improve it and constantly, keep on improving it. So one, that's a part of self-awareness for me. And second, it's also a part of creativity and also giving back. So on Sundays, I teach music. I teach music to kids. I teach music to adults. So I have quite a few students who I teach music to, and I perform as well whenever I get the time. So yeah, that's my fourth practice.
Wow, incredible. And that ratio that you mentioned, that your music teacher introduced, the 1 hour to 8 hours to 80, like that sounds, upon first hearing it, quite intense. And
Yes,
tell me, do you truly live by that? Or how?
100%.
Mm,
Sorry, I got you up there.
yeah, I'm curious, like, how do 80 hours of reflecting on a specific piece or a specific new lesson in music, what does that look like?
Yeah, so every time, when you're listening to music is such a, beautiful thing that every time you're listening to, the same piece, you get something else out of it. You feel something different, you hear something different, you get something different. So it's a very conscious and intentional practice that even 80 hours sometimes I feel is not enough when I'm listening to a piece. When I'm performing, it's one of those things that really gets me into the flow. And you experience what really being in flow
Mm.
is like. You're so much into the moment when you're listening or when you're performing that nothing else seems to matter at that point.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to your final practice, Gaurav, if we may. So please indulge our listeners. What is your final impactful
Yeah.
self-leadership practice?
Yeah. My final practice is yoga. So, yeah, but that's also an everyday practice. So I do yoga every single day. So I finish my morning routine with a yoga session.
Wow. But it by the sounds of it, it just requires such intense discipline. And I know you've said that in your mind, you don't even give yourself the space to think about it. It's if then statements. How, if I wanted to start building up towards a morning routine like that, how would you recommend I start?
Yeah, again, there are plenty of books out there for this, like Atomic Habits. How do you start simple? And, how do you do habit stacking? So you don't have to put your brain, and again, start very small. Start small and stay consistent. Even if you can't do, 1 hour yoga practice, 10-minute sun salutation goes a long way,
Mhm. Mm.
you know, and that the power of consistency. So normally how our brain thinks is that, oh, we need to do a 1 hour practice. It's all or nothing.
Mm.
Whereas, doing even a small part of it and staying consistent goes way farther than, just thinking of it like a full big practice or a session.
That makes a heap of sense, 100%. If we go take a step back and go back to the practice in and of itself, what's the main benefit that you derive from your yoga practice, and what intention do you bring to it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's an interesting question. And, but, it's one of the topics which is very close to my heart again. And I say to people that when you start yoga, you're always thinking of yoga as like a yoga session, a physical yoga session where you're doing a lot of poses. And some people associate, yoga with
Mhm.
flexibility, that, oh, if I'm doing yoga, it's a lot of flexibility. But yoga is, I think, everything that you do outside of a session. So yoga in a session is just an enabler, but what you do outside of the session is real yoga. So again, it comes back to the same framework. It leads to so much of self-awareness of your own body, of your breath, how your breath is flowing through your body when you're into a certain pose. How are you balancing the flexibility with strength? At what point do you come to where you're like, oh, my physical body is now giving up.
Mhm.
I need to switch into the mental body. So that framework again comes into play in yoga as well. So yoga is, I feel, everything that you do outside of a actual yoga session.
In the sense of an actual yoga session allows you to bring to light all of these practices or qualities of way of feeling yourself and knowing yourself, and really lets you apply them in a very intentional way. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And also, even if you look at the physical practices, it's not something that, I just was in a yoga session, so I was keeping my shoulders straight. Now, if I'm sitting in this
Mhm.
session, I'm still keeping my shoulders straight because, that's so much ingrained in me with the yoga session that I'm being intentional about it. I'm being aware
Mhm.
about it. When I'm standing
Yeah,
straight. I'm more aware of my body. More aware of my breath.
yeah. which is such a beautiful way of looking at it, because so often, especially in Western Europe, in the States, we think of yoga as yet another practice to look after
Hmm.
our body, and it often gets lumped into sports, right? And kind of that very simplistic view of sports that doesn't take into account the kind of the various dimensions that you've mentioned, such as the mental, emotional, and spiritual. And I feel for me there was always this big resistance in, I have to do this, exercise every day, whatever. And once it became reframed as it's a way for me to feel my life energy, things completely switched. And all
Mm.
of a sudden, it's something that I feel drawn towards doing, because it doesn't feel like I need to do this to become a better looking version or leaner version of myself, but rather it's a way of connecting to something deeper.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And also, like, I've heard things about from, so yoga, people have perceptions about yoga, right? So I was talking to a friend and he was like, when I'm 60, I'll switch to yoga.
Mm,
And I said to him that you're just not going to a right class, and then he came to me for a yoga session and we did a yoga session together. And, but I'm not kidding. 7 minutes. It's like, this is it. You know, I, I can't take any more. So it's if you think that it's an easy practice or you need to be 60, yeah, I I just think that you're not going to the right yoga session.
mm,
And it's also about your own journey, that how much you want to push yourself. It's the same pose which you can do, when you go into the detail, the same pose can feel like, I'm actually going to demonstrate, if that's okay. So, a very simple thing in yoga is, in many poses, they would say that raise your hands up. And if I ask people to raise their hands up, they will raise their hands up like this. And now what's missing is my elbows are bent. So now you straighten your elbows and it already gets hard. And now my hands are ahead of my shoulders and my body. So now you bring your hands closer to your get closer to your ears and it already becomes more hard. And now you have to squeeze your ears using your biceps and you're dying all of a sudden. So it's such a simple pose. How you execute that, the minor
mm,
micro details can have a massive impact.
mm. And also, I mean, I love that. And I guess it also, what it means is that it's such a nice practice or such a nice way of feeling like, am I pushing myself too much? Right? It doesn't always
Hmm.
have to be the it's not enough, but also I remember the one of the very first yoga sessions classes I went to 15 years ago. I was completely exhausted by the end of it, and sweaty and everything, and with a red face. And the teacher said to me, she was like, stop straining yourself, stop going so hard on yourself. You are pushing way beyond what's needed. And it was such a powerful message for me in that moment,
Yes,
because it went way beyond that one class and actually was a much deeper message about how I showed up in life. And that's really fascinating how I can bring that to the fore.
amazing. That's beautiful.
Mm.
Awesome. So let's try and summarize this if we can. I'm going to try, and I'm going to try and do this from a slightly selfish angle, if I may. One of the biggest things I've taken away from this conversation today, Gaurav, I'm going to try and piece it all together in my mind and see if it comes out right. On face value, a lot of the practices that you've discussed today, due to the nature of the cadence in which you perform them, they're almost daily,
Mm.
or if
Correct.
not close to being daily. Also, to someone else, they may, on the outside, look like practices that require a lot of energy. And because they require a lot of energy and because of the cadence by which you perform them, I think it would be fair for someone to assume that these are energy consuming practices. the thing that I've taken away from this conversation, and I'm interested to see if I've interpreted this correctly, is actually it's your framework and the way in which you view these practices, but you talk about these practices as a source of energy, which is
Right.
the opposite way I think most people would look at them. In my experience, running is a practice that is energy zapping, but your framework and your mental approach actually means that running to you is a source of energy. When you talked about
But
music, it was the source of energy after, of the flow state. That's the interesting thing I've taken.
yeah, 100%. And there's also like, this is science backed, right? When you run, you get runner's high, you get endocannabinoids, you get, dopamine, you get endorphins. So you do get energy back.
100%, 100%. Well, let's conclude there if we can. Could you summarize the 5 practices just for our leaders one more time?
Yeah. So before I summarize, I'd say that, normally these practices are so helpful on a rough day because, you wake up and all of us have rough days, right? You wake up and you have a rough day. And then I simply ask I ask myself these questions. Have I meditated today? Have I gone for my run? Have I done my yoga practice? Have I done my music? And if the answer to these have I read and written? And if the answer to all these questions is a yes, my answer to the rough day also changes.
I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting that on the bad days, as it were, on the challenging days, is when you need these practices the most.
Exactly.
When oftentimes, certainly in my own experience, it was only on the good days that I would give myself the space and the time to practice it. So there's a lesson in there for me, for sure.
Amazing.
Awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Self Leadership Podcast. Gaurav, this has been an absolute pleasure. A coach once gave me an exercise that was to write a letter to myself as old Josh. And one of the things I've taken from this episode is I'd like most of your answers today to be in my own letter. So this has been a very cool conversation for me personally. I've enjoyed it. I'm sure Anna has too, and I hope
Absolutely.
our listeners have. So thank you so much for your time, your openness, and your honesty as well. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Gaurav.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyed talking about these practices. It's not often that, I get asked about these practices. So when I do, yeah, it's such a privilege and a pleasure to talk about these practices.
Awesome. Well, we hope our listeners have taken as much away from this conversation as we have. And yeah, we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you very much.